Warrior's Gate came about when Martin Jenkins, a radio producer at BBC Radio 4, particularly working in the Saturday night theatre slot, sent a script of mine called An Alternative to Suicide over to the Doctor Who unit. Sent it to Chris Bidby and said, take a look at this guy. I actually learned this morning that Chris had approached Radio 4 and asked for samples from writers who were working, in radio plays at the time, as a way of finding fresh material. Whether it was Martin's initiative, whether it was Chris's, I don't know. All I know is that I got a meeting in, I think it was Threshold House, that big building at the end of Shepherd's Bush Green that is now been taken over by developers, but at the time was the most horrendous office block working environment I have ever seen. It was like something out of Orwell's 1984. Long, grim, dark corridors, and as you walked along you would see, these doors that looked like the doors to cells in the Lubyanka, and on those doors would be the names of the great shows, that you'd been inspired by throughout, your childhood and watched with awe and pleasure at home. And that stuff was coming from this terrible, terrible place. Met with Chris. Chris introduced me to Tom, who was in the building at the time, Tom Baker, mad as a box of bats, wearing an entire, Rupert the Bear's trousers. Tom had an entire suit made out of that, and a cheese sandwich in the pocket, which he used as his opposite number in acting demonstration, to show me, how one portrayed fear and how created horror on the screen. And I was a 24-year-old novice writer, completely overwhelmed by the whole process, was let loose in the playground and had a terrific time doing it. Chris sent me away to come up with some one-page ideas, and the one-page idea I came up with, I think at the time it was titled The Dream Time. It eventually became called Warrior's Gate, but that 4-act structure on one piece of paper became the kind of roadmap for what would be the next 9-12 months of my life. I was in the studio for the first day of shooting. I was there at the read-through. I wasn't there through the rehearsal period, and I wasn't there through some of the turmoil that I've been told went on during the shoot. What I was incredibly impressed by was just how complex a job of shooting a 4-part Doctor Who story was. I think they had no more than 2 days in the studio to get 2 hours of material, all of which had to be got in the can, or the plugs were pulled on you. This was a very kind of strong electricians union period, and so everything had to be done at a breakneck pace. There wasn't a lot of time for indulgence. There wasn't any time for indulgence, in fact. Everything had to be meticulously planned. Everything had to be executed on the button. Incredibly impressive work by the actors, who in the middle of all this chaos would deliver a note-perfect performance, exactly on the marks, in the light, looking in the right direction, matching shots, matching scenes from before. All that had to stay inside their heads because around them was chaos, organised chaos, but chaos nonetheless, and an immense distraction. So I came away hugely impressed by all of that, and sort of slightly frightened and intimidated by it as well, because here was a studio with 100 people in it, all of whom had jobs, all these moving parts that had to work and had to interlock, and behind it all, this story that I'd come up with on one piece of paper so long before. Afterwards, I kind of looked at it and I thought, has a lot changed? Has too much changed from what I set out to do? Did somehow the journey get diverted along the way? Is what went on screen what I'd seen in my head? At the end of the day, none of that really matters, because what matters is what the end product is. Everybody was compromising with everybody else. Everybody was working hard. Everybody was doing the best, and everybody was trying to make it work. And just because the way that you were trying to make it work wasn't necessarily the way that finally got achieved, I think is you can gripe and moan about it, but it doesn't really get you anywhere, because the work is still the work at the end of the day. I do look upon it with fondness. I remember it with affection. And of course, as a start to a career, when you're writing your CV, even after all this time, there's my Internet Movie Database page, and there, right at the bottom of it, starting it all off, two stories, 2 seasons of Doctor Who.